All right, welcome to Chapter 2, Learning Plan 3. We're going to be covering the counselor as a person and as a professional. Before you read the chapter, you need to take the self-inventory, which is located at the beginning of the chapter. And what that does is just kind of helps you identify, clarify your attitudes and beliefs about some of the issues that we're going to be discussing throughout the chapter. Well, it's good to do these once in a while as a helper, and as you move through the process of your education, you want to constantly be assessing where you're at in your beliefs and your values in terms of helping others and what direction you want to move into. There's a lot of options out there for wanting to help others, and the better you can narrow it down, the easier it's going to be once you graduate. Then you can decide kind of what direction you want to take. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to talk about self-awareness and how your decision came about to become a counselor or get into this field, and your motivations to become a counselor. Now, I know not everyone is going to become a counselor that's taking this course, but you're going into a helping field, so it's good to assess where your motives are. It's important to know what your motives are as well, what your motives are. So in the book, it discusses that there's some research out there that supports newer counselors or people wanting to get into the counseling field to actually go through therapy themselves so that they can understand what a client typically goes through, and really the courage it takes a client to kind of unpack issues that they're dealing with really a complete stranger. In a short period of time, a counselor is responsible for trying their best to build rapport and trust with a complete stranger and help them in probably one of the most or some of the most difficult problems that they're facing in their lives. So it's important as helpers to be able to identify what your motivation is for being a counselor. Now, the other aspect of that is that everyone has values, we all have belief systems, we all have our morals that we adhere to, and there's good ones and there's bad ones, but in and of itself, to the person, they're seen as good. So, or to the individual rather. So what we need to do is identify what our values and what our beliefs are, and make sure that they align with what the ethics for that helping profession is. If they don't, then we should probably have some type of plan to either work on changing those or find a new career path, so to speak. So, looking at working with clients, everyone's going to have biases. And so it becomes important to understand what yours are, because they are going to play a part as you work with your client. We all have them. We all have beliefs that differ from other people, and we're going to have beliefs and values that differ from our clients. For example, you may have a client, if you're working with substance abuse population, that comes in and they may come from a family, he or she may come from a family where alcohol is used regularly, the parents drink regularly, the client started drinking at a very early age, and he or she may not see that there's an issue with the alcohol itself. So coming from a different standpoint, if you come from a family where alcohol wasn't used regularly and it was used on special occasions and was not used to excess, then we may have a different viewpoint or a different belief about how alcohol is used. And so if we try to combat that belief system in that client, it's just going to make them adhere to that belief system even more. And so we have to be able to recognize what values and beliefs come in conflict with our clients. And also, values and beliefs are shaped as well by our life experiences. There are going to be times during your profession when you have life crises come up or difficult life situations that arise, and you have to focus on where your client's at instead of your particular crisis. And so it becomes very important for us as helpers to be able to have some type of support network, or have counseling ourselves, have therapists ready to help us as needed as well. It's very important. All right, so one of the other things we need to cover is transference and countertransference. And so when we're working with our clients, transference comes from the client. It's when the client views us and treats us as, say, an authority figure in their life, let's say a parent or a guardian that they grew up with. And for instance, let's say that guardian or that parent was abusive towards them, and so they draw back and they're very reserved, and then they may see you as a helper in that light as well, and may be reserved. And so it's important for us to dig deep enough with the client to understand if they are having issues with transference, and transferring some of that onto us as helpers so that we can address that as needed. Countertransference is the opposite, where the clinician or the helper is transferring their assumptions about someone onto the client, or that particular population onto that client. It could be, for instance, that you group people that smoke marijuana, you group them all together as being lazy, and not, lazy and not willing to go out and look for employment, sit at home and veg out on the couch watching TV. So you want to try to understand what issues you may have towards certain populations that you're serving, so that you can avoid that countertransference as well. All right, one of the biggest things a helper faces is stress of working with clients. I'll say that specifically working in the corrections field as an AODA counselor, it's very easy for people to experience what they call empathy fatigue, which is when you share similarities with other fatigue syndromes, such as compassion fatigue. It's very similar to that. Secondary traumatic stress. It's basically like burnout from listening to people and their trauma. And actually, as helpers, we can experience trauma. We can actually develop post-traumatic stress disorders from just listening to people and their trauma. And if you're not able to disconnect yourself from that environment and from those discussions, it's going to be very difficult when you come home, because you're going to carry that with you, and that becomes very, very stressful. I know for me, when I started working in the field of corrections, it took me a little while to disconnect myself from what was going on at work, because I heard some pretty horrific stories from people, and that has an effect on you no matter how good you are at cutting off or letting things go after you leave work. There's still some things that linger in your mind, and it really takes a good amount of effort in the beginning to be able to disconnect from those situations. So it's very important that as helpers we have a way to relieve stress, a positive way to relieve stress, so that we don't carry that into our home life and it ends up affecting our families. Burnout's very similar as well. If you're not able to disconnect yourself from work, the rate of burnout it's gonna catch up to you. The rate of burnout working in corrections is immense. You're looking at probably a good 6 months to a year that people typically last working inside an institution or working within corrections itself, because it's a very stressful environment. And so you really have to have some strong support networks in place and be able to address stress when it does come up, and recognize it and deal with it in an appropriate and positive way. All right, and then impairment as well we'll be covering a little bit, and that's just when there's the presence of an illness or some type of severe psychological depletion, and it really prevents us from doing the work that we need to do. It gets in the way, becomes a barrier. Clients will see it. They'll see it from a mile away, so it's very important that we get that taken care of. If there are issues, that we address those. Self-care, like I mentioned before, it's very important that we disconnect from our work. Once you leave work, you leave it at work, and you find positive ways to get rid of the stress, whether it be working out, whether it be finding a hobby, something like that. So it's very important that you take care of yourself as well. Alright. So there are several case studies in this chapter as well that you want to take a look at. I'll give you a more practical picture of what we're discussing. I think that one of the biggest things too to take a look at is a section on stress and sources of stress, because inevitably working in the helping field you are going to experience a good amount of stress, and you've got to be able to learn how to handle that. Because if you don't, you're going to burn out very quickly. And I think that I've been able to work in the field of corrections for 10 years because I have a positive support system away from work at home, and I engage in various hobbies and do different things to help take away the stress. So that is chapter 2, and if you have questions, please let me know. You should be taking the pre-chapter self-inventory. Check out the PowerPoint. Make sure you review the keywords, and we'll see you in the next learning plan.